It's the mafia, you know I'm rocking with the Bills. It's the mafia, I'm with the Buffalo Bills. It's the mafia, you know I'm rocking with the Bills. Hey, it's the mafia, I said no one on top of us. I said no one is blocking us on top of our division. So it's clear that it's no stopping us. Google best team in the league and we popping up. Home game for the playoffs, but you already know Gabe Davis is a rookie, but he playing like a pro.
Bills Mafia, what is up? And welcome into the Bills Brawl. I am your normal Thursday host, and I am here on a Friday with a brand new show called The Podcaster's Corner, and I have a very special guest. It is Judge Mathis from Buffalo Fanatics, the podcast extraordinaire, host with Dave Tilton of the Air Raid Hour, also known, I think it's still known as the Bills Guys. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Yeah, not too much. We are still known as the Bills Guys on Twitter. I don't think that the Buffalo Bills are going to send us a cease and desist over a Twitter handle. So we're still rolling with the Bills Guys. We changed the title above our handle, but on Twitter we're still the Bills Guys.
I want to thank you for joining me, and this is a bit of a different idea. I wanted to do something different. I'm sure, as you know, there's a lot of Bills podcasts. It's easy to get a lot of overlap. And I was looking for something new. So this show is going to be talking about the Bills, but we're also going to talk about how people got started, any advice they have for anybody in the community. Because I know there's still guys who are out there, you know, grinding independently, starting podcasts. They seem to pop up all the time. I was independent for a while, you know, and it's not easy. It's definitely not an easy grind. So why don't we start with a little bit of your background before you were famous, let's say?
Well, you know, I actually got my start in sports journalism. That was my original intended background, but I realized that it was a very saturated market when I got to college and I got into that major, and I made the decision early to sort of pull the plug on that and move elsewhere. But it's always been like an interest of mine to talk about sports, to share my opinions, to hear the opinions of others, to sort of debate back and forth. It's just something that's always, you know, really interested me. So I moved out here to Arizona for work about 5 years ago, and about 3 years ago, I just got a random Twitter DM from a random podcasting network. It's called the Pulse Podcast Network. They're no longer around. They have slowly turned into something called Unwrapped Sports, but essentially they were trying to do what like Locked On does and have a podcast centered around every single team, but from a fan perspective. I got a DM from them. They said, "Hey, we really like your tweets. We really like the way you talk, you know, on Twitter about the Bills. Would you be interested in starting a Buffalo Bills podcast?" And I said, "I've never done a podcast before. Sure, why not?" And then a couple of days later, they DM me, said some other guy expressed interest. Do you want to do this podcast with him? And I said, of course. Well, you know, why not? And then, you know, the rest is history. Me and Dave spoke on the phone for 20 minutes. Then we downloaded the Anchor app on our phone. And I think for the first 6 months of our podcast, we literally recorded talking into our cell phones. It wasn't the highest production quality in the world. We had no idea what we were doing. So it's gone a long way since that day 3 years ago. 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell, like, you guys have great chemistry. I think a podcast is always better when there's, you know, a guest or a co-host. I certainly have a lot of experience talking to myself on the podcast, and it's definitely, there's definitely a different dynamic, and I think you guys, you get it so well. I didn't know you had been together that long, but it makes sense because I think you got great chemistry. And I think you, within your podcast, I talk a lot about trying to find my lane in the podcasting community, and I think everyone needs to kind of find their lane. But I feel like you two have your own lane even within your podcast. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, I think that's what's great about it. You know.
Yeah, he, you know, I'm sort of the loose cannon a little bit, and Dave sort of comes back down to earth. Like I'll like make a take, and I'll just be like, "Yeah, it's my take because it's my take." And Dave will just be like, "Well, here are the statistics to back up what you were saying." Like, thanks, Dave. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think I remember like the first time I ever heard you guys, I think, was one of the podcasts. It must have been in 2019 when you were very mad at Brian Dable I think for not running the ball more in certain situations.
Let's forget about that.
Yeah. No, but it was. So when did Fanatics approach you, or did you approach them? And when did that all happen?
So, one of the biggest things about podcasting is finding an audience, right? When me and Dave first started our podcast, we'd have 19, 20 listeners on Anchor, and that was great. But we wanted to try to grow ourselves a little bit, because I think it's always a better time if you feel like you're being heard, if you have some semblance of an audience, and just having at least some kind of marketing behind you. So we started to reach out to some local Buffalo related sort of some networks and stuff. I'm not going to name the ones we reached out to or anything like that, but we reached out to a few. We heard back from a few. We got some feedback from a few. A couple of people wanted to, some networks wanted Dave and not me. Some networks wanted me and not Dave. And we're just like, nah, we're a package deal. Like, you're taking both of us, or you're getting none of us. So finally, we just sent a DM to Buffalo Fanatics. They said, come on board. I think they were just trying to grow their podcasting network in a little bit at the time, because they hadn't, we had noticed that they hadn't published a podcast in a few months. So we said, listen, we will give you consistent weekly content. We know what we're doing. We won't embarrass you. And they said, hop on board, and the rest is history, because as some of these other, podcasts started to pop up, it was easy for me to notice, who had sort of that same potential, who could talk into a microphone or talk with their buddies into a microphone and have an educated conversation and had a personality and could jump on board with Fanatics and give us more than just 1 day or 2 days a week of content. We added Joe Miller. We added Jay Spence. We added the Hoof podcast. Zbot was already on board, but we brought him back. You and Casey were doing stuff for a while as well, before you departed. Yeah. So it was fun. It was a heck of a lot of fun. And we've lost some podcasters since then to some other networks and things of that nature. But, that's the one thing about Bills Mafia is we're one of the most educated fan bases out there. And, we brought in a whole bunch of new podcasts and personalities since. So, it's somewhat of a revolving door, but it's fun, and I really enjoy the crew we're working with now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's ever been, not ever. There's a few guys in who kind of started when I did. I think I started in August of 2019. And Joe Miller was a guy who I was like, man, I'm jealous of that guy. Like you said, I was getting 20, 30 listens, and I could tell that he was getting 90, and I'm like, he has such a good voice for it. Like, he's just, yeah. And I was always like I love Joe. I think his content's great. And I was like, man, how do I be more like that guy? And he had a big rise, like Bruce had a big rise. The Hoof kind of came out of nowhere. I love Sterling. He's a good friend of mine. But yeah, I think what's cool about Fanatics is that you said it's a bit of a revolving door, but it's cool because you guys are really I feel like more open kind of to a beginner maybe than some of the other podcasting networks. And that's no slight against them. I think they produce great. I listen to every podcast at least once a week, but it's neat. I think it kind of refreshes your content. There's certainly you and Dave who've been there a while, Joe, but it's nice. And Ryan and Mitch just started. I think that's really cool. I'm a big fan of Ryan. I think he's fantastic.
Dude's a star. Him and Mitch.
Yeah. And you know how I knew he was a star? The way he structures his tweets on Twitter.
Oh yeah.
Just he just has this thing where, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but I'm like, man, he just tweets differently than I do. Yeah, it's hard to explain, I guess, but
I mostly just rage tweet in all capital letters. He has proper enunciation. He structures things well. He's been doing a lot of things lately where he's just finding random guys in the middle of the draft that nobody talks about. He'll just find a short video clip of them, or he'll find he'll find a picture of them, and he'll sort of start a little hive or a little fan club. So he'll get he'll get a whole bunch of people in his mentions like in love with this like middle round draft prospect, and he'll just create a whole sort of a fandom around that one or two players. So I love that aspect of what he brings to Twitter as well, and he always asks great questions, so he'll bring up great conversations that you can have. So like today, I think he was power ranking his what he thinks is the most valuable positions in the draft. So like here's if I'm a general manager, here's the most important position in the draft, and here's the least important position in the draft, and here's everything in between. And then there was 30, 40 comments of people debating back and forth, like what should be number 2, what should be number 3. So he's really good at sort of figuring out some sort of off the cuff topics or off the beat topics, I should say. I'm sure he puts thoughts into them that people want to talk about.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. He's good at generating conversation on Twitter. That's kind of what I was looking for. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Bills, then we'll circle back to some more podcasting stuff. There has been a lot of back and forth, especially about Matt Milano. I think he's a guy who, when the season started, everyone was like, man, we can't lose this guy, and then the season goes on, he gets hurt again. They struggle for a game or two, and then they figure out how to use A.J. Klein. And though it's not the same role, the defense seemed to function just as well with changing that up. And then he came back, and it seemed like the defense missed. You could tell that the defense missed him a little bit. But Brandon Beane, and I've said this a few times already, he talked about Milano the way he talked about Jordan Phillips. And now I'm kind of like, man, I don't know if I want him back. I mean, $14 million, that's a lot. And I know you can move money around, and it's still a lot. What are your thoughts about Milano?
I think I think one thing that we as Bills fans need to realize is that we're a good football team. Like, we're a great football team. And if you look around the National Football League at some of the good to great football teams, what is the one thing that they all have in common? A great quarterback. And we have that great quarterback. Now, you go and you look at like Tom Brady's waning days in New England. How does Tom Brady go from New England, where he looks like his career is over, to Tampa Bay, where he goes and wins the Super Bowl? Well, Tampa Bay had some semblance of respect for Tom Brady. And instead of surrounding him with nothing, they gave him all the toys he wanted. You go and you look at Kansas City. They have Patrick Mahomes. They give Patrick Mahomes plenty of weapons on offense. And then you look at the defenses of these two Super Bowl teams. Kansas City, what is their defense? Their defense is Chris Jones, Tyrann Mathieu, and a bunch of plug-and-play guys. That's it. Like, Frank Clark has not lived up to that contract. Anthony Hitchens hasn't lived up to his contract. All of their corners are, mid-tier veteran free agents or are young guys. Same with the rest of the guys in their defensive line rotation. And then Tampa Bay, every single person in that defensive backfield is, second or third round picks. And they invested all of their money up front. So to me, Matt Milano is not Levante David. Matt Milano is not Shaq Barrett. Matt Milano is not Tyrann Mathieu or Chris Jones. As much as I love Matt Milano, he's not going to be that difference maker. He's a very good piece to your defense. Don't get me wrong. You want to have him. But you want to have him under that rookie contract umbrella. You don't want to be paying a player like that $12, $13, $14 million unless you think there's another step that he's going to take in his career. Because to me, Matt Milano is an $8 to $9 million player. And if you can get Matt Milano in that $8 to $10 million range, go for it. You can afford it. You can splurge it. The salary cap, other than this year, goes up year after year after year. But if you're paying that guy $14, $15 million, you're saying to him, you're one of the 5, 6 best players on our team. And you're going to be one of the 5, 6 best players on our team going forward. You are a true cornerstone player. You are a true difference maker on this football team, a player that puts us over the top. And I just don't think he is. I mean, if you look back at the 2017 Buffalo Bills that made the playoffs, everyone just feels so safe and comfortable with a name on the defense. They just feel so like, oh, I just feel so safe and warm inside knowing Matt Milano is our weak side linebacker. I feel so safe and warm inside knowing Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde are our safeties. When in reality, having that much depth and having those many good players in your defense really isn't sustainable. And you look back at 2017, the Buffalo Bills had a very good defense in 2017, and our linebackers were, in the middle, it was Preston Brown, On the strong side, it was Lorenzo Alexander. And then on the weak side, it was Ramon Humber and a rookie, Matt Milano, who didn't break the lineup until halfway through the season. In reality,
Right.
they relied on Ramon Humber, Matt Milano, and Rafael Bush. So there are other ways to go about being successful and putting players on the field and having a quality defense to go along with your offense. You don't have to have that name that makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside.
Right. And I think that ties in. Me and my co-host EJ were talking about, well, what did Tampa do to the Chiefs that the Bills need to do? And we identified 4 or 5 different things, a couple on each side of the ball that, oh, hey, that could be better. But when we really got down to kind of the core of the discussion, it was really like they just need more athletes. And I'm not saying that Matt Milano is not an athlete, but I think there's lots of athletes in the draft now. And to your point, if you're spending $12 million or $14 million on Matt Milano, you're kind of precluding yourself from maybe signing someone else next year or getting more athletes. Like you said, the guys in the secondary for Kansas City and Tampa, maybe they're not the most technically sound. They're younger guys, but I think it's fair to say that they're all athletes. And I think like the Bills defensively are built maybe a little too much on technique and scheme in a way, and they just need younger and more athletic guys.
Yeah, we made the comment on our show Monday afternoon. I asked Dave straight up. I said, would you rather have Matt Milano or would you rather have Trey Hendrickson? Pick one. Who are you going to pay? I'd take Trey Hendrickson every time. Give me that athlete on the defensive line, a guy who can eventually usurp Jerry Hughes and become the alpha pass rusher on this team, a guy who can go out and get you double-digit sacks a season. Give me Trey Hendrickson or a Shaq Barrett along on that defensive line. Maybe not so much Shaq Barrett. Everyone loves Shaq Barrett, but I think he's still more of a 34 type of player. But regardless, would you rather go out and pay that premier pass rusher, a guy like Shaq Barrett or Trey Hendrickson, as opposed to a Matt Milano, when you can go out in the second or third round of this draft and draft Chaz Surratt or Jabril Cox or Nick Bolton? Or, even wait till the third or the fourth round and get like a Tony Fields. Like, those guys can be serviceable, especially if you improve what's in front of them.
All right, so now speaking of the draft, I've got to ask you about your brand. Hamza Nasruddin. I know you were all in, I believe if I'm correct, you were all in on Kyle Duggar last year, if I'm not mistaken. Either him or Jeremy, or both.
I was in on the big nickel last year. I was the big nickel
guy. well, I know that for sure, yeah. What's your feeling on like Hamza? And I know a real popular name is the kid from Notre Dame, Owusu Koromoa. Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned, I think, Jabril Cox, who's kind of in the same vein, maybe not exactly the same. What's your feeling on that? Like, as some people have called Hamza especially kind of the tight end eraser.
Yeah, I mean, Hamza would be great. And this is the thing that's so weird about the draft, and Greg Tomsett pointed this out on Cover One, is I see Hamza, and I see a guy who could go like in the second round, because if you remember last year in the draft, and he's projected up by most people to go in the third round, but this draft is going to be so volatile because of no scouting combine and the virtual meetings instead of the in-person meetings and players opting out and all these things, limited number of games. Like, this draft is going to be so weird. So a guy you think is going to go in the fourth round could go in the second round. A guy you think is going to go in the second round could slip to the fifth round. It's going to be a crazy draft. But Hamza's a guy I think is going to be taken earlier than where he goes in every single mock draft I see on the internet, which is to the Buffalo Bills in the third round. Because last year in the draft, what was it? It was Kyle Duggar and it was Jeremy Chin. It was those two big, box type of safeties, guys who could play towards the line of scrimmage, guys who can add a lot of versatility to your defense. That was the belle of everyone's ball. And Kyle Duggar went to the Patriots, Jeremy Chin went to the Panthers. And then after that, you were like, all right, well, where can I get value? Where can I get a value big box safety? And there was that kid from Clemson whose name, it was Tanner Muse.
Oh, okay, right, yeah.
Who went in the, I want to make sure I'm correct on this. He either went in the second or the third round, Tanner Muse, late second or early third round. Tanner Muse went to the Oakland Raiders. So
Right.
Hamza is better than Tanner Muse. And Tanner
Yeah.
Muse
Oh,
went like late second, early third, somewhere in that range, way higher than I thought he was. I thought Tanner Muse was a fourth round pick, and people thought I was crazy calling him a fourth round pick because he was going in the TDN mock drafts in the fifth round. It's like, yeah, that's not gospel. So
right.
a guy like Hamza, you got to ask yourself, and same with Tyler Selvin, who I really like up front, who, I think is going to have a Dexter Lawrence type of rise up this draft board. Just a big space eater. You saw what Vita Vea did in the Super Bowl and how he made everyone around him better. That's Tyler Selvin in this draft. You want the Vita Vea in this draft? It's Tyler Selvin. And I think people are going to wake up to that and realize that sooner rather than later. So all these names that people are getting in the third round, like Tyler Selvin or Hamza, it's I just don't know if they're going to be there in the third round. So you got to ask yourself if you're willing to invest that second round pick in those guys if you want them.
Right. And that's going to be the real interesting thing, because for as great a team as the Bills are, seeing what happened to them against Kansas City and then seeing Tampa against Kansas City, I feel like sometimes I feel like it's a Grand Canyon divide, between the Bills and I'm looking at, the offensive line. I'm like, man, I don't know. I think they got to upgrade the guard positions. They got to keep Darrell Williams. What are they going to do at big nickel? They could use another pass rusher. Maybe they can use another defensive tackle. Are they going to sign Jonnu Smith? Do they need, all of a sudden for a team that went 13-3, I feel like the Bills have needs all over their roster all of a sudden.
Josh Allen hid a lot of deficiencies last year. That defense ran so hot and cold. I don't think we're used to seeing that as like that. That's what I said. That's that sort of shock factor earlier when we were talking earlier. I don't think people realize that, like, just how good Josh Allen was this year. He was second in MVP voting, and when you have the second best quarterback in the National Football League in any given year, you can make up for having holes on your roster. Kansas City's defense, not that great. Patrick Mahomes makes up for a lot of what they do over there. So the Buffalo Bills have holes, but they're also not the worst in the world at every position. If we can re-sign Darrell Williams, we can add an efficient, effective body on the edge, and we can get Starlo to Lele back. We can draft a linebacker. I'm completely content with our DBs. Maybe we add that hybrid guy. Maybe we don't. And then on offense, just, find a little bit of speed, add another veteran running or tight end. This is another team that could pony up and go to the Super Bowl. Is it a team that's loading up like we all thought they would do when we thought they were going to have money, but it turns out they didn't because of coronavirus? No, but it's another team that can go out and do exactly what they did in 2020 and maybe more if Josh Allen continues to progress from how he's already progressed.
Sure. And I like your point about kind of the reloading. I wrote an article a couple months ago kind of explaining the structure, and I think how Brandon Beane did it. It was so interesting because every time one of these young guys or two of these young guys came up for a contract, there were 2 or 3 veteran contracts that were going to fall off, like Addison and Vernon Butler and whoever it was at the time. And now, obviously, like you said, the salary cap is shrunk this year. It's probably going to go up quite significantly next year, I would imagine, especially there's a new TV deal coming. So yeah, they might have to sort of ride this out and then kind of reload in I guess that would be 2022, technically speaking, and go from there. So what do you think they can do if it is really going to be sort of Josh carrying a roster that's not quite there? Is there 1 or 2 areas, whether it's offensively or defensively, that we talked about, that if they can just do 1 or 2 things to help Josh and that's it, what would those be for you?
We mentioned this on our show. Curtis Samuel sticks out like a sore thumb to me from Carolina. Brandon Beane drafted him in the second round in his last draft in Carolina. Obviously, he was the assistant GM, but Curtis Samuel is a guy who really came into his own this year. And you look at what Curtis Samuel can bring to your offense. So if you cut John Brown, you save almost $8 million. Curtis Samuel is probably going to get a contract somewhere in the $8 to $10 million range. So you can essentially cut John Brown and use that money to sign Curtis Samuel. And Curtis Samuel is just an absolute freak. I'm sure most people who are listening to this know who Curtis Samuel is. But Curtis Samuel is a wide receiver, running back hybrid. This is a guy who can be the Buffalo Bills' speed running back, and he can be sort of combined in a in a backfield with Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. This is a guy who can replace John Brown's deep ball ability on the perimeter. This is a guy who can replace Isaiah McKenzie's abilities as a jet sweep guy. And this is a guy who you can even, if you want to get rid of Andre Roberts, can even, plug and play as a kick and punt returner because it's something he's done efficiently in his career as well. Not to mention, one of the aspects of his game that he really started to develop this year under Joe Brady, if you go and you look at his highlights from this year, he was really good at just what John Brown, like everyone said, John Brown, deep threat, because people were using him as a deep threat his whole career. Curtis Samuel was making a lot of plays like 10, 11 yards down the field, moving the chains type of plays, as efficiently as Teddy Bridgewater could get him the football. So Curtis Samuel is literally a wide receiver who can do it all. He can also help you in the return game, and he could be your running back. Like he's just such an X factor player where I can just imagine a world where Curtis Samuel, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Cole Beasley are all in the field. Who do you cover? Like who do you cover at that point with all of that ability on the field? And you're not even talking about maybe Dawson Knox continuing to develop and having a Dawson Knox out there on the field as well, or whatever veteran tight end you might want to, add in free agency or, I just see Curtis Samuel as just such an X factor piece. As much as we have more other needs, if we could just literally in free agency add Curtis Samuel and add Darrell Williams and maybe add like a Joe Haig and make Cody Ford and Ike Butker work at guard and then just draft all defense, I would be a happy clam.
Yeah, I really like that idea, and I think maybe as fans we kind of have to sort of accept that the Bills are limited. There's a lot of things that I think we can identify that they, like we said, they might have to wait a year to really attack because of the free agency money and things like that. And Curtis Samuel's the guy who's certainly getting a lot of a talk right now. And Isaiah McKenzie's future seems to be a little put out kind of a cryptic tweet. So did Feliciano. It seemed like he was kind of, I don't know, criticizing Dable. I don't know if maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I mean, these guys are humans. They can speak their mind. Who am I to say? But let's circle back a little bit to the podcasting, because you'd mentioned something earlier in the beginning when you're out there and you're getting 20 listeners. Mm-hmm. I feel like, the Bills market's so competitive. Yeah. I haven't counted, but I would say there's at least 40 Bills podcasts. Yeah. You go to Houston, there's 4. So it's just totally different. What would you say to people who are trying, whether it's just to get more listeners, to get noticed? Do you have to kind of join a podcasting umbrella at this point? I know Pat Moran has built his independently, like Rockpile, but has it got to the point where you really need the backing of a Buffalo Fanatics or I don't know. What do you think?
I would say no. To me, the two things that I would say are the most important, and I think Joe Miller is a great example of this. I know that we picked him up at Buffalo Fanatics, but I still feel like Joe would have grown exponentially with or without Buffalo Fanatics, because Joe is great with two things. Number one, invest in your technology. Make sure that you have a quality microphone. Make sure you have quality headphones. All the things that you need to do to create a quality podcast. Because if somebody turns on your podcast and the audio is doo-doo, like they're going to turn it off, no matter how smart you are, no matter how good you sound. Not even how good you sound, like no matter how great your takes are. If you can't audibly illustrate that to the people listening, they're going to turn off your podcast and look for something more professional quality. So that's the first thing. Joe has that audio engineering background. He was really good at it. It's like you're listening to the radio. It's like you're listening to Casey. Casey.
Yeah. Even like when he first started, and I know I think I had him on. I think I told him this the other day. I said I was the first person to ever have you on as a guest. And even then, when he just had his laptop, it was still like
Yeah,
really good.
because he knows what he's doing, and even when he just had his laptop, it was still a quality USB mic. It was still headphones plugged into a quality laptop. He would run his program through plugins, in whatever platform he uses. I use the same plugins as he does, but he uses like some really fancy version of GarageBand. I just use GarageBand because I'm a cheap bastard. But yeah, audio quality is number one, and then number two is building relationships with people, like getting on social media. Getting my thing is Twitter. I'm a big fan of Twitter. Sometimes I think Twitter is a bubble, and the only thing that exists in Bills Mafia is on Twitter. Other people like Buffalo Fanatics has a huge reach on Instagram. I have no idea how Instagram works, and I get too mad.
Me
at
neither,
people.
to be honest. I don't know.
I get too mad at people on Facebook, but I still do it to an extent because it has to be done. But just create relationships with people when you're posting your podcast. Don't just post your podcast and say, "Hey, listen." Pose a question. Let people respond. Respond back to them. Follow people, and when people follow you, actually follow them back. Like, don't. Some people on Twitter are so worried about like, well, I have 4,000 followers, but I follow 3,000 people, so it just looks like I followed a bunch of people and they followed me back. Who cares? Who cares how many people you follow? If they're Bills Mafia, if you are creating relationships, if you are building your brand, because whether you're at Buffalo Fanatics or you're on your own, people start to gravitate towards you, not the logo next to your podcast. So you want people to be there for you. You don't want people to be there for the logo next to you. So investing in your audio quality and building relationships, to me, I think are the top two. And then number three is just to be willing to be inclusive and be willing to collaborate. Like, be willing to bring people on your shows. Like, don't be afraid to reach out. Bills Mafia is some of the friendliest people ever. Like, any one of the major, guys will, Joe Marino or Joe Miller or myself or you or, Rico or, Greg or Bruce, they love to go on other people's shows and help them grow their brand. So don't be afraid to reach out to other people, and don't be afraid to collaborate with smaller podcasters either. I mean, if you're doing an independent podcast by yourself and you notice there are 2 or 3 other independent podcasts that publish Bills content, team up, like, all right, guys, hey, I'll help you promote your stuff if you help me promote my stuff. I'll post on Mondays, you post on Tuesdays. Like, work with other people to create your own like unofficial network of just people who support each other. So that would be the 3 things that I would suggest. Try to get as professional quality as possible, invest in your audio, build those relationships, and be willing to collaborate.
Yeah, and that's great advice. And I think for me, I still get in my head sometimes about, I think sometimes I worry too much about like, oh, well, I need to be more like Bruce. And then I'm like, well, I need to be more like Joe, and when I really should just be myself. And I guess I would say too, I think not worrying about if people listen can be really helpful, because I think we all start it just because we like to talk about the Buffalo Bills, and I can get too consumed with how many people are listening and who's interacting with me and how many times one of my tweets gets retweeted. So that's kind of like a weakness for me. But yeah, I was really surprised. I didn't know what to expect when I first got into podcasting, and everyone was really helpful, and I didn't know which mic to get, and I was DMing people just out of the blue. Like, they didn't know who I was. They'd never talked to me, and everyone was helpful. And I kind of had my, yes, like, this is really cool moment when I got all these guys to come on the podcast. And from my point of view, why would they want to, like, it's not like a benefit to them in terms of their podcast because I had 10 listeners, but you're right. Like, they were willing to help somebody who was new in the industry. And I think that's a really cool part, of the community. And I think there's times where we all don't agree, and that's okay. And I would suggest too, there's definitely times where I don't agree with people. And I think you still want to maintain those professional relationships. So I think that you have to, at least for me, I try to disagree with people in the podcasting community in a respectful way. And if I do feel like I'm getting agitated, I kind of go back to my corner, you know, and because it is all about relationships. You want to get these other people on your show. So yeah, I think that's some pretty good advice.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of collaborating too, I remember, you mentioned like getting all these people on your show. When the Hoof guys first started out, they're the Colorado Bills backers podcast. That's what they were. They would post like a pregame show before every game from like the bar in Boulder, Colorado, where they watched the game and stuff. But they wanted to sort of grow into something different, and I think they had they got Dean Kindig from Bill's Mafia blog, and they got Joe Marino, and then they called me and they said, "Hey, do you want to come on the show?" So I said, "Sure, why not?" And I went on the show. And I think the show was supposed to be like 45 minutes long, and we just sat there like bickering back and forth with each other for like 2 hours, debating like quarterback hierarchies and stuff. And I was like, "Man, I love these dudes' vibes," and that's when I sort of gave their name to Pierre, and I said, "Dude, check these guys out." Like, there's some really good dudes who provide some, I think, really quality content that would help our brand. So just in sort of like that regard too, like you never know who's listening. You never know, what sort of maybe, is a little bit embarrassing. It's like that's one of my biggest things is when me and Dave first started, we tried our best not to reach out to people. We didn't want to reach out to Rico at Buffalo Fanatics. We didn't want to reach out to Greg. We didn't want to reach out to Bruce. We tried, like we did every once in a while, but we didn't want to go to that because we sort of wanted to grow on our own, and we didn't want to be known as the guy who brought so and so on their podcast to try to get more listens. Like that was like a fear in the back of our minds, was we didn't want to be pigeonholed as those people. But the
Right.
more I realize it, the more I'm like, who cares? like you're just here to have a good time and to have fun and to just become as knowledgeable about the sport as possible. So when there are smart people who provide quality content and they're willing to come on your show, freaking have them on. Like, get out of your own head about it. So that is one of the things that I think we learned, we learned early on, because we were very hesitant to bring guests on our show. And we were really hesitant, I think, to bring on some of the bigger names in Bills Mafia. We did on special occasions, and they weren't really football conversations. It was like, we did a series our first year about how did you become a Bills fan and things like that. So, just don't be afraid to reach out to people. Don't be afraid to have on the show. Don't be afraid of I think people in general need to stop caring about what people think about them.
Right.
Because, back when our first podcast first started, and you, like I mentioned, you have 20, 30 listeners, you live and die by every comment, right? Like somebody comments, like, this take sucks. And you're like, man, I need to make this person happy. This person actually listened to my show. I need to say something they'll like. And it's like, no, that's not how it works. You can't appease everybody. You can't make everybody happy. Don't try to cater what you do to the people who are listening. Do what you do. And if the people like it, they will come.
Yeah, that's great advice, and to your point about the guests, when I started having people on, I wasn't sure what to expect. I guess maybe I thought like, oh man, like maybe I'll get a bump in listeners, and a little bit, but I think to your point too about, Joe Miller, they'd listen, but then they were kind of like, okay, well, Greg Thompson's not on your show this week, so we're not going to listen. And so I think it is really true that you really have to sort of build yourself up. And so the good thing for me about having those guys on, having you on now, is just building those relationships within the industry. It's not always going to get you tons and tons of listeners, and if it does for that episode, they might not stay. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, because this seems to have exploded, I don't know if it was in the middle of this year, in the middle of the season, or at the beginning of the season, but the YouTube live show. Yeah. I mean, like, it's on fire. Everyone has one. Mm-hmm. It's just crazy. Like, that just kind of like came out of nowhere.
New frontier. Like,
yeah.
It's constantly evolving, right? I mean, it went from people writing articles, and articles were really big, and people would listen on the radio, to all right, now everyone needs to have a podcast, and now it goes to like everybody needs a YouTube a YouTube live show. So it's just an ever evolving media that we find ourselves in. You're always trying to find yourself a leg up. You're always trying to find a wider audience. All those different things. I think the YouTube live show. The two guys I think that are sort of the kings of the YouTube live
Greg
show,
and Aaron,
at least in Bill's Mafia, are Rico and Dan Mitchell. Like those are the two guys who really started it, and they grinded before it was really a medium, right? Like so now we have this app, and it's no secret anymore. We used to try to keep it hush hush, but everyone has it now, called StreamYard. And StreamYard is just this platform where it's pretty much like OBS or OBX, whatever they call it. Like I said, I'm not a tech guy, but it just does it all for you. It's like literally streaming for dummies, and you can create professional quality, professional looking broadcasts, and you can listen to people's commentary and put their comments up and respond to it, and it's super simple, it's super easy. So since that app and that technology has come onto the market, people who might not be as technologically savvy, because I mean, if you're doing a show with like OBS or OBX or something, like you need a producer. Like you can't.
Right. OBS is not the easiest thing to use ever.
You can't do a show and interact with people and do all those things, and at the same time produce your show using a platform like OBS. But StreamYard you can. Like our show, it's just me and Dave. Everyone, we have some moderators in the chat and stuff that Buffalo Fanatics provides. But it's just me and Dave. Like, I make the intro video, and I click the go live button, and, it's his job to make sure to read through the comments and to look for super chats. Like, we produce the whole show on our own. And, we went from, doing podcasts to the hundreds to doing live shows for the thousands. We had a pregame show this year that topped out at like 13,000. Rico.
Oh man, that's
Rico
crazy.
had a post-game show this year that almost hit 20K. Like it's absolutely insane. I've never seen anything like it before in my entire life. I was just in awe watching the numbers. And I know we just had this whole conversation about not getting caught up in the numbers, but like he was doing a conversation. It might have been after the Ravens game, or it might have been after the Colts game. I think it was at night. It was late at night. It could have been the Steelers game. He was up to 11,000 people live, like not 11,000 people live and after the fact. Like he was up to like 13K in the chat live, and it was insane. It was absolutely insane. So I never realized how big of a medium YouTube was, because I just was never into it. Like I was never a YouTube guy. But there are people who use YouTube instead of actual television. They find people whose opinions they like, and they watch their video podcast instead of watching the news. They find things like sportscasters that they like, and they watch them on YouTube instead of watching SportsCenter. Like there are people who legitimately go to YouTube as a resource for like almost all their news and information, and it's kind of a scary thought, because there really are no moderators and things there. So there are some downsides to it, but it's also just this big, huge, expansive medium. So it's been fun. It's been different. I've had, self-esteem issues for a good part of my life. So putting myself on camera every 2-3 days a week has been something, it's been a process. Sometimes I have to drag myself behind the camera just because I'm just like, I just don't want to do it that day. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I'll, change my shirt 3 times before a show. I'll do my hair 4 times. Like it's crazy. It's crazy. I think on Twitter today, or on YouTube, somebody watched our show on demand the other night, and they commented afterwards. They're like, "Why does the guy on the left not look like his avatar?" Because I got like a little cartoon avatar in our.
Oh right, yeah.
Thing. And I just commented back. I just commented back to him. I was just like, because I got fat. That's why. Like, give me a break, dude.
Yeah, like. I mean, I had that made 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Leave me alone.
It's like, we have the same haircut. It works. Give me a break.
Yeah. I give those guys a lot of credit, and Dan's a guy who I've come across his things on YouTube. I've only watched 1 or 2, but man, sitting there, especially by yourself, and just kind of talking into the camera for an hour. I guess if you've got 10,000 people in the chat, then you've got you can just
Oh, yeah.
go through the comments but man, just doing that, just sitting there and talking, that's, I don't know, like that. I guess the reason I'm asking is because I'll probably end up doing it. But that can be, it's weird doing it by yourself. I think I'm obviously Rico's done thousands of them, I think, by this point, so he's very used to it. But it's still just as so weird to me. But you're right; it's completely blowing up. I mean, everybody has one. Like I said, it's just crazy.
Yeah, a lot of people, what they do now, like I know Cover One does this, Shout does this. They go live and then they take that audio and they rip it onto the podcast form. So and Cover One is always
Right.
done. Cover One has actually always done this. So maybe I should have given them a little bit more credit. Greg and Aaron have always been big on the YouTube as well, but they were always using like Zoom and Google. They just started recently using StreamYard as well. So I I apologize for forgetting them in the first round of conversations. They've always been ones, but for Greg and Aaron, they've I think just recently started to incorporate commentary from the listeners, because when they were
Yeah.
doing it on Zoom or Google, it was just those two. There was no interaction. They couldn't hear what people were saying as people were saying it. They were just live streaming it to a platform without any sort of interaction
Right.
and stuff. So there's a bunch of different ways you can go about doing it, but I like it. As a podcaster, it's different. Like, me and Dave talk about all the time. We're like, man, that show didn't go where we thought it was going to go because the listeners took us one way. The people watching the commentary, they threw a super chat here, a super chat there, and it kind of threw off our flow, and we went in a totally different direction. We didn't even get to talk about what we wanted to talk about, like what we were passionate about talking about, because other people want to talk about other things, and that's great because you're giving people what they want, but it also leaves a little bit of emptiness inside yourself because you're like, man, that thing I really wanted to say, or that conversation I really wanted to have, we didn't have it. So like, I've been trying to dabble back into the podcasting game, but it's podcasting.
Yeah.
Like if you're someone who just wants to get things off your chest and wants to do it in a manner in which you are not being thrown off for a loop and in different directions every 2 seconds, stick with the podcast. But if you're someone who doesn't mind going with the flow, enjoying a good back and forth with people, we tell our listeners all the time, like they're the third host of the show. Like, me and Dave might have one topic to start the show, but they dictate where it goes from there. And their opinions are just as valid as ours, and their questions are just as valid as ours, and their topics are just as valid as ours. And, our show wouldn't be nearly as awesome as it is if it wasn't for having such an educated fan base, every week in the comment section, guiding us along.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point when you talk about getting your audience to know you a little bit, like giving a piece of yourself to the audience, because you're a voice behind a microphone and a podcast feed and a Twitter account, but being on YouTube and letting people see you and then letting people interact with you is certainly, it's a brand builder. Like that's what, Twitch, for instance, that's what it was built on. Like, come watch me play video games. Like, we all have a common interest, and now YouTube has gone, very far in that direction. But it's, everyone who has a Google email, like, automatically has a YouTube account. So it's much easier to get on to YouTube. But I think it's a great way, to get yourself out there and say, hey, this is who I am. And I wonder, do you think, and maybe it's not for you guys, because like I said, everybody knows you and the fanatics. Do you think that going on YouTube would take away from podcast listens? You know what I mean? Because they've seen you on YouTube, and yeah, you're taking the audio, but or is it just a different way for people to interact with you? Like, some people want to watch and some people want to listen.
Yeah, I mean, I've honestly haven't done enough research on it, and that was my initial fear. But I mean, for us now, Dave and I, our number one thing is the video show and posting the audio. So like after the show, I'll download the audio. Usually at the beginning of the show, we'll check in with people, like the normal listeners, like, hey, who's in the chat today? And we'll spend the first 2 or 3 minutes talking about that. So I'll go through and I'll clip that out to make it more audio friendly. And if at the end of our shows right now, we're doing a mock draft simulation. where there's a lot of like pausing, a lot of thinking, a lot of dead air time, all that stuff. So I'll go and I'll clip that out. So I'll go and I'll clip things out to make it more audibly friendly, and I'll post it onto our podcast, our podcasting network. And that's more just out of like convenience for people who might have missed our show and want to listen to it on the ride in the car, as opposed to watching it on their TV or on their cell phone or wherever they watch their YouTube. But if your focus is podcasting, I think my suggestion would be and again, you can do whatever you want. My suggestion would be to separate it, like do a podcast a week and then do a Q&A show a week. So you can go and you can get off your chest what you want to get off. You can go and you can bring on a guest and you can ask that guest and you can go in whatever direction you want with that guest. And it's fine. And whoever wants to listen will listen. And then you go and you do your live show, and the commentary is what it is. And you let the commentary guide your show, and you can rip that audio too if you want and just give a little, bonus to your podcasting channel. So if you're really serious about, this is what I want to talk about, this is the order I want to talk about it in, this is how I want it to flow, this is how I want it to be structured. If you're that kind of podcaster, if you're that kind of content producer, my suggestion to you would be podcasting, and it would be pre-recorded video. I know Dan Mitchell does a lot of pre-recorded videos. They're like 10, 15 minutes long. Highly successful. Right. But he does that goes along with his live shows. So my suggestion would be a combination of the two. Some people can make it work. Shout makes it work. Cover One makes it work. They do a really good job of doing a podcast while people are watching and then recording it, and they probably get just as many listens from the audio people. I do find that a lot of the YouTube people are like, yeah, not a big podcast fan. And a lot of the podcast people are like, yeah, not a big YouTube fan. So I do think there is some overlap, but I do think it's two different markets.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And one Bills off-season roster-centric thing before we wrap it up. A lot of talk about J.J. Watt. First of all, would you like J.J. Watt? And do you think that the Bills would be willing to go after him, or do they look at him and go, oh, man, he's a couple injuries? What's your feeling on J.J. Watt?
To me, I want J.J. Watt on this football team, but I'm not willing to bend over backwards to get him on this football team. So the report came out today that Cleveland is on J.J. Watt's radar because Cleveland has what J.J. Watt wants, was like the headline of the article. And they're offering him $17.5 million. Here's how I want J.J. Watt. I want J.J. Watt for 1 year, $10 million. That's what I want J.J. Watt for. Because I want him to come in here. I want him to show he can keep his career going, show that he's not completely over the hill. He can be your left end and add a power player that maybe frees up guys like Jerry Hughes to be more effective as the sort of bendier pass rusher on the other side. He's a guy who on passing downs can slide onto the inside and play a little bit of three technique. He can even sub in for Ed Oliver at the three technique, and you have AJ Epinesa and other guys can rotate in because we know how Sean McDermott likes his rotation. So I like the versatility of J.J. Watt being able to play three tech and being able to play left end. I like that he adds the power player aspect to this football team. I think that's missing on the defensive line. We missed it in Star. There was literally no power players on this defensive line this year, and it showed. They got bullied, and it made Tremaine Edmonds and it made Matt Milano's life very difficult as well because the dudes were just getting straight bullied up front. So I want J.J. Watt, but I'm not willing. I want J.J. Watt to come here because he thinks we're Super Bowl contenders. I want J.J. Watt to say, oh, 1 year, $10 million? Sure, I'll do it. Because I think I can put this team over the top and win the Super Bowl. I mean, you look at that AFC Championship game against Kansas City. They bullied us from start to finish. Those were players who have been there, done that. They understand how this league works. They understand what you can and cannot get away with in games like that. And they came out there and they took us to it. Took it to us. Was it Bush League? Yeah, it was. But the refs weren't calling it, so they kept doing it. I want a player like a J.J. Watt or a Richard Sherman. Again, I'm not willing to pay either one of them. But I just want a player who's been there, done that, who understands how to take his game to the next level when he's in the biggest moment. And I think that's lacking right now for the Buffalo Bills. We don't have players either who haven't done it before or just don't understand how to take their game to the next level when they're on the biggest stage.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. And before you go, why don't you tell all the people where they can find you, all about Fanatics. As we said, you guys are all over the place. Got your hands in all the cookie jars.
Like you said, Buffalo Fanatics, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook, thebuffalofanatics.com. If you head over to supportbf.com, there's a nice link tree. You can find all of the Buffalo Fanatics stuff. You can find me on Twitter at Judge Mathis, Mathes. My Facebook is for my family, and I just quit Instagram. So that is really the only social media platform of choice that I have. I have a podcast that comes out every Monday morning called The Take, where I just share a couple of thoughts and opinions that I have for the week. It's a short podcast, usually runs between 20 and 40 minutes. That drops Monday mornings in the off season only. Monday, Thursday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern time on the Buffalo Fanatics YouTube. You can catch myself and Dave Tilton for the Air Raid Hour. It is a good time. Come join us and add to the conversation.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Charlie. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. And I would like to thank Judge Mathis for coming on this very first episode of The Podcaster's Corner. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Next week, we will have another special guest for you. If you would be so kind to tell a friend about this podcast, it really helps us out. It gets us in front of other Bills fans we want to interact with. Leave a rating or a review on the podcast as well. That would be super helpful. You can find us on Twitter at Bills Brawl. I'd also love it if you guys could check out the Brawl Network. A lot of awesome stuff going on over there. You can find me on Twitter at Charlie_Gross_. I hope you'll give the other episodes of the Bills Brawl, the past episodes, a listen. That would be great as well. And as always, Bills Mafia, find a way to embrace your growth mindset and trust the process.
We got Corey, but we barely ever punt it. Cause we just running up the score on our opponent. We got Beasley, we got Diggs, Singletary, bout to juke him out of shoes, make him miss, run it in, Zach, also throw the digs, it's for Sig, Terry Johnson, pick six, to the house, take a flick, hey, it's the Mafia, you know I'm rocking with the Bills, it's the Mafia, you know I'm rocking with the Bills, it's the Mafia, I'm with the Buffalo